Why don't you open up to Daniel chapter 11, please? Daniel chapter 11. I know that the last couple weeks have been extremely technical. It's required us to be good students of the Word. And I encourage you guys to be Bereans. It's a reference to Acts 17:11, where Paul says the Bereans were of much more noble character than the Thessalonians because they went to the Word to see if that which we said was true. And so I encourage you guys, as we're going through these technical studies and looking at a lot of passages, that you do your own studying and you do your own research so you can see that I'm not just making this stuff up. You know, one of my primary goal is to have you guys be well-versed in the Bible so that you understand the Bible. And so I encourage you guys to dig in yourself. Now, that said, with all this heady technical things that we're reading about eschatology and end times things, next week we are going to get straight into practical Christian living. We're going to begin a study in the book of James. And you can't get much more applicable than the book of James. And I say nuts and bolts, but maybe nail and hammer is a better way to put it. And the Word is the hammer, and we are the nail. And so I encourage you guys to come back next week. We're going to have a great time in the book of James. I'm really looking forward to it. Well, we made it as far as verse 36. We studied the first 35 verses of Daniel chapter 11 last week. And then we noticed that in the first 35 verses of that chapter, there's over 130 prophetic statements made that cover a period of 375 years, from the time that Daniel himself lived, 375 years in the future. But it wasn't written like a vague horoscope. I hope you don't read horoscopes, but I'm sure we've all checked one out here and there. But let me put it this way. I hope we don't rely on horoscopes, okay? But you ever read them and like, that could be for anybody. I don't care if you're born in March or December, it doesn't make a difference. That is so vague that I could make it for my life. That's not the way Daniel wrote these first 35 verses. It is so accurate and it's so detailed. If you're here, we went through it verse by verse, but it's so detailed that it would have been impossible for someone to write these things without divine guidance. It was written in advance and it's just incredibly detailed. All 130 plus prophecies, we didn't point them all out, but they're all there, from those 35 verses, point to very specific times in human history that, as I told you last week, I spent, I had the Bible out and I had my computer with like 8 tabs on Wikipedia, checking out, all this stuff, and it all lines up. But after last week, you might be thinking, if you were here, all this talk about the Ptolemies and the Seleucids and King of the North and King of the South and Antioch Epiphanes and all of this stuff, Cleopatra, what in the world does this have to do with me? The important thing for us to remember when we're reading through, for example, these first 35 verses of the book of Daniel, is to see that it's history written in advance. And if Daniel could look at these 375 years of human history that has yet to take place and detail it with such incredible accuracy. He batted 1,000. I was just talking with my buddy last night. We were watching the game together, and I said, to be a very successful baseball player, you got to be successful at the plate 1 out of every 3 times. And you'll probably get in the Hall of Fame with those numbers if you can hit the ball 1 out of every 3 times. Daniel bats 1,000. 130 pitches, every one of them out of the park. It's home run after home run. And so we know that because he was so accurate and so detailed in these first 35 verses, which were kind of tedious, but we can know because of that, even if we don't like history, we can know that what is going to be written beyond this, beyond our time right now, is going to be accurate as well. He's not going to bat 1,000 for 130 plus prophecies and then strike out the rest of the way. You know what I'm saying? He's going to be hitting home runs all along. And so in verses 21 through 35, let me just kind of set the pace here a little bit. We see Daniel describes in advance this man that history knows by the name of Antiochus Epiphanes. And he is a foreshadowing, and there's a lot of time spent on him, because he is a foreshadowing of a coming world leader. And he uses flattery, he uses deception and favoritism and scheming, all to gain and keep power. But he, at the bottom, at the center of who he is vile, he's insane, and he's murderous. Talked about last week, it said that he killed over 60,000 Jews when he came back into the city that one time. And so now, where we're at this morning, beginning in verse 36, there's no historical events that correspond to the rest of the chapter. First 35 verses, this, open Wikipedia page, that matches that. This matches that. That matches this. But now, we get to verse 35, there's no corresponding history for us. And so the things that we're about to read are prophetic even for us. It's not just history. It's all prophecy to Daniel. But we can say, well, this portion, verses 1 through 35, is prophetic history, prophetic for Daniel, history for us. In verses 36 to the end of the chapter, it's all prophecy for Daniel and for us. Now, look at verse 35, and I think the end of verse 35 kind of points to that. It says, some of those of understanding shall fall to refine them, purify them, make them white until the time of the end, because the end, is still for the appointed time. Now, again, if you're new with us, forgive me. This has kind of been a study that each one has led into the next study as we make our way verse by verse. And especially this portion, this section began in chapter 10, and it's all been going along. But if you remember, if you were here with us in Daniel chapter 9, Daniel is told that 70 weeks are determined for his people, the Jewish people. And the 70 weeks is 70 sets of 7 years. And so the first 35 verses of this chapter detail the events that take place for his people in the first 69 sets of 7 years. And what is written beginning in verse 36 is this appointed time, the time of the end, and the period, it's the last of the 70 weeks, the 70th week, and it's something that we know biblically as called the tribulation. Does that make sense to everybody, what I'm saying so far? Thank you. I think I need a vote of confidence after last week in this. So Daniel, he's going to jump here. As I said, there's over a 2,000-year gap here between verses 35 and 36. And so he's going to jump from talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, who lived from 215 BC to 164 BC, to a time that's still yet future for us. And so every year from the time of Christ, in the 160 years before that, it is not mentioned. And so as we get now to verse 36, this future time, he's going to talk about, I said this, Antiochus Epiphanes, that a lot of time was spent on because he's a foreshadowing of someone. And now we're going to read about the guy that he was a picture of, a type of. And he's going to use flattery and deception and scheming to gain and keep power himself. And he's going to be even more vile, more insane, and more murderous. And we know him as the Antichrist. And so, beginning at verse 36, I want us to look at several descriptors that are used here of the Antichrist, his character and behavior. First, if you take notes, he will have a big plan. It says the first phrase of chapter 12, verse 11, verse 36, it says, "Then the king shall do according to his own will." The Antichrist is a counterfeit Christ. We in our mind, it always means against. He's against. And then there's truth to that. But Antichrist means in place of Christ. And he is a counterfeit to Jesus Christ. Jesus is one, as we know from the New Testament, he's one that would come and lay down his will. He said, I always do the things that please the Father. He said, not my will, but your will be done. He is the exact opposite, Jesus is, of this character that we're reading about here. Antichrist, he's the great counterfeiter, and he's not going to say, I'm not going to do your will, Father. I'm going to do my will. This is according to my will. And this is the desire that Satan has for each one of our lives. Do according to your will. What pleases you? That's what you should be doing. What do you want? What satisfies you? What makes you feel good? That's the message that he just bombards our culture and us with constantly. Do your own will. Just do what you want. You shouldn't have religion or people telling you how you should live. Go do your own thing. If that's sex, great. If it's illicit drugs, that's fine. If it's greed, sure. If you're covetous, that's perfect. Even if it's morality, do that. Even if it's something that's crossing your T's and dotting your I's, if that's your will, if that makes life about you, go ahead and do that. And it's this idea that Satan has been using all along, to do your own will. It's what he used in the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. You don't need to follow and trust the will of God. You don't need that for your life. You don't need him telling you what to do. If you want the fruit, go ahead and grab it. Man, you might even become like him. And he uses the same thing with Jesus in the wilderness. Hey, are you hungry? Hey, if you want it, turn these stones to bread. Hey, if that's what you want. Hey, if you're really the Son of God, just bow down to me. All these kingdoms of the world, they'll be yours if you just, you bow to me. Hey, just go ahead. Just do it. Do what you want. And so he wants us, our enemy, the enemy of your souls and mine, wants us to be self-willed and selfish. And in the Antichrist, he is going to find someone that grabs a hold of that totally and completely, that we have not seen the likes of yet. And so, secondly, we're going to notice the next phrase in verse 36 is that he's going to have a big ego. He shall exalt and magnify himself above every god. And again, this in place of Christ. The counterfeit, as opposed to Jesus, who was equal to God. In Philippians chapter 2 tells us that he humbled himself and made himself of no reputation. That's what Jesus did. Jesus was God in the human flesh, and he was born in a family that was accused of having premarital sex, which was just totally unheard of back in that day. He was born in a rinky-dink town that no one thought very much of, but not even in closed quarters. He was born in a barn amongst manure and straw. He made himself of no reputation. The Antichrist, though, he's going to be all about how can I make myself a reputation. He's going to claim himself to be God. And this is exactly, again, fast forward from where we're at in Daniel chapter 11 to 2 Thessalonians. You almost thought I made up a new book of the Bible there, but I didn't. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul says, when the man of sin, the Antichrist, is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. The Antichrist is going to have this big plan for life, and he's also going to have this enormously huge ego problem. He's going to demand to be worshipped, and here's the thing, you're like, well, I would never fall for that. I don't know. The Lord says that there's going to be a strong delusion in that day. People are going to worship and appreciate how much self-confidence he has in himself. Because we do appreciate self-confidence. No one thinks like Eeyore's my superhero, right? Like, no, we want Tigger. Speaking of, I have a Tigger tattoo. But that's not why. Some of you are like, what? You do? Okay. Let me get back to where I'm going here. Not in my notes, by the way. Hopefully not in the recorded message as well, but let's go on. They're going to appreciate the self-determination, the self-confidence that he has. And also, if you take notes, I want you to get this down. He's going to have this indestructible characteristic to him, not only when it comes to media and just having this polished aura about him, he really does seemingly have this indestructibleness to him. In Revelation 13, verse 3, it records what seems to be this mortal head wound, something that is fatal. And the same thing is described as well in Zechariah 11:17. Again, if you want to get those down, Revelation 13:3 and Zechariah 11:17. But this counterfeit Christ is going to be fatally wounded and recover. He's going to have his own counterfeit resurrection. And people are going to fall for it, hook, line, and sinker. His recovery is going to shock the world. This is amazing. This is crazy. I know in our Revelation study I talked about, we've all seen the video of JFK driving in the back of the convertible in Dallas and getting shot. What if after his head whipped back, he came back forward again and survived somehow? JFK would have been worshipped. How could someone go through this? And so it's that type of thing that the Antichrist is going to feed off of the whole time. Just like this big plan, this big ego. Third attribute that we notice here about the Antichrist is that he has a really big mouth. Verse 36 continues and said, "He shall speak blasphemies against the God of gods." One of the characteristics that's going to set him apart just above and beyond everyone else is he has no problem talking trash about God. That's going to be right in his wheelhouse. I'm sure he's going to make it humorous and funny, and everybody's going to appreciate it. And this is something that we're very close to. All of these events, I think, we're very close to. But we're very close to a period of time where a world leader could talk a lot of trash about God and about Christians and totally get away with it. And I think that's because of what the Apostle John records for us in 1 John 4. He says that already there is in the world a spirit of Antichrist, of this against, in the place of God attitude. And so the Antichrist is going to embody that. Fourth, again continuing in verse 36, he will have big success, at least temporarily. It says, "And he shall prosper till the wrath has been accomplished, for what has been determined shall be done." Initially, things are going to play out exactly like the Antichrist wants. He wants to consolidate military power and economic power and just the authority of government. He's going to consolidate all of that, but he's going to walk himself directly into the plan of God, for what has been determined shall be done. And so, which is that the enemy of our souls will be defeated. Yeah. Fifth thing to notice about him is he's going to be part of a big betrayal. Verse 37 says, "He shall regard neither the God of his fathers." I'm going to stop right there. This phrase is the primary reason that most Bible scholars believe, although he's going to lead this revived Roman Empire, that he himself is going to have a Jewish heritage, that he's going to have Jewish blood flowing through his veins, because the Jews, the only way they would receive a Messiah is if that Messiah was Jewish, and they could say, okay, this is a Jew. But others, let me just say, in your translation, if you got a different translation, it may say something a little different. Other translations could say, he shall regard neither the gods, plural, of his father. And that means whatever his heritage, even if he isn't Jewish, he isn't going to have anything to do with religion. He's going to use religion to his advantage, but it's really not going to be a part of who he is. He shall regard neither the God or gods of his fathers, nor, next phrase, this is interesting, the desire of women. He shall regard not the desire of women. And this phrase has led many to conclude that it's very possible that the Antichrist will be a homosexual. Others say, and I'm not going to say with definity which one that I believe it is. Others say it simply means he's celibate, and that is a possibility. Still others believe, and this is probably what most people believe, is that they believe this is another indicator that he is going to be of Jewish origin. In the Old Testament, the desire of all women was that they would be the one that would carry the Messiah in their womb. That the desire of women was to have the Messiah. And so, no regard to women, he's got no respect or honor for the Messiah. But despite the uncertainty about what's being said here, what we do know is he's going to highly regard himself. And it goes on, he shall neither regard the God or gods of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall exalt himself above them all. And his God is himself. Sixth thing to notice about him, in verse 38, is that he will have big military power. But in their place, in the place of heritage and relationship, he shall honor a God of fortresses. And a God which his fathers did not know he shall honor with gold and silver, with precious stones and pleasant things. The Antichrist is, at least the second portion of the tribulation period, is not going to serve any God in the traditional sense. His God is going to be military prowess and strength. He is pro-him, and whatever's going to help him achieve his goal, whatever military power is going to help him to have conquest over the entire world, that's what he's going to be about. If you take notes, Revelation 6, John says this, "Behold, a white horse. He who sat on it had a bow, and the crown was given to him, and he went out conquering and to conquering." This isn't talking about Jesus Christ. This is talking about the Antichrist. He has a bow, he has a crown, and he's set on military victory, to conquer, conquering and to conquer. And so here we read that this Antichrist, his God is going to be fortresses, strength, and he's going to be empowered by Satan himself. Verse 39, "Thus he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge and advance its glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many and divide the land for gain." Now, Paul records again, 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, that the coming lawless one, he says, is according to the working of Satan, with power, signs, and lying wonders. Just as the Holy Spirit, if you're a born-again believer here today, and the Holy Spirit empowers your life, Satan is going to empower the Antichrist. And so, to sum up, he's going to have a big plan, a big ego, a big mouth, the blaspheme God. He's going to be successfully initially, but fall eventually. No allegiance to heritage or religion, and he's going to thrive on military might. Verse 40. "At the time of the end, the king of the south shall attack him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter the countries, overwhelm them, and pass through." The angel is telling Daniel now that when the Antichrist comes to power, and he has all these other attributes, not everyone is going to submit to his authority and just readily fall in line with him. And so, it's talking here about the king of the south, king of the north. We can't say with absolute certainty who is being described here. It could be that a confederation of African or Arab nations is the south, and that there's Russia from the north. If you look at a map, Moscow is directly straight north of Jerusalem. But the details may be fuzzy, but the point is clear. Whoever these kings of the south and the king of the north is they're going to unite to come against the Antichrist. And he now, as we're going to read in verse 41, is going to draw up his position in Israel. It says in 41, "He, the Antichrist, shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape from his hand: Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon." All of these peoples listed here are in present-day Jordan. And they're going to escape the grasp and this military might of him passing through nations and overpowering. They're going to escape that of the Antichrist. And it may be, to tie in, and I know this is technical things and there's some listening and paying attention to be done, but I think it's important for us, the Lord put us in here for us to get, and I think it's during this time, if you're familiar with end times things, that this is where the remnant of Jewish people flee during the tribulation people, is to current day Jordan, where Petra is and other things. And Jesus said this in Matthew 24, when you see the abomination of desolation, which is this being that's going to be this Antichrist idol apparently of himself set up in the temple, he's going to demand to be worshipped. Jesus says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel standing in the holy place, let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains, not west to the Mediterranean, flee to the mountains, go east. And then to tie this in again, Revelation 12 verse 6 tells us that Israel fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her there for 1,260 days, or 3.5 years. So as the Antichrist comes to Israel, a remnant of Jews flee that area, and they head east, and they're kept safe there in Jordan. And Daniel goes on and records, many countries shall be overthrown, but they shall escape from his hand, Edom, Moab, and the prominent people of Ammon. Verse 42, he shall stretch out his hand, that is the Antichrist, against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. So he's going to have wide swaths of military victory. In doing so, he's going to expand his wealth. Verse 43, he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians shall follow at his heels. It could be that these other precious things could be the oil reserves that are in the Middle East that increases wealth. Verse 44, but news, so he's in the middle of dominating the south, but news from the east and the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go out with great fury to destroy and annihilate many. So he goes to the south, puts down this insurrection, increases his power, increases his wealth, and then he hears news from the north and from the east and says, I got to head back up north to Israel and set up a base there. And this news that he hears could be, again, if you've been with us through our Revelation study, it could be the kings of the east that are now coming, and he hears word about this. But he sets up his base in Israel. Verse 45, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. So, the counterfeit Jesus, the impostor Messiah, is going to attempt now to rule and reign the world from Jerusalem. That's some pretty precious territory to the Lord. And he's going to be put down a finality. It says, yet he shall come to his end, and no one shall help him. So at the end of this 7-year tribulation period, the Antichrist is going to come to Jerusalem. It says between the seas. If you look at a map, if you got one in your Bible, maybe you could just be familiar with this already. The seas are the Dead Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. Between the seas, there's Jerusalem, next to the Holy Mountain, next to Mount Zion, right there. And so he's going to gather there and enter into the final battle of human history known as Armageddon. That battle is described in Revelation 19. And I encourage you to, if you're not familiar with Revelation 19, to read that yourself. But he's going to have a big plan, big ego, a big mouth. He's going to blaspheme God, be successfully initially, but fall eventually. He's going to have no allegiance to heritage or religion. He's going to thrive on military might and attempt to wage war on God. But as it says here, he shall come to his end, and no one will help him. Chapter 12 begins. At that, or at this time. What's recorded in the next verses are events that will take place during the Great Tribulation, not after what we read, but the events transpire simultaneously. So maybe even a better way to understand it is if it says at this time instead of at that time. It says at this time, or at that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that time. So we read here about Michael. There are 3 angels mentioned in the Bible. There's the fallen angel Lucifer, we know as Satan. There is Gabriel, who's a messenger type angel. He's always bringing news. Brought news about to Mary, about the coming Messiah. And then there's Michael. And he not only has this position that the Bible refers to as archangel, is he has this role that we read about here as a defender and guardian of the nation of Israel. It says, let me read that again. At that time Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people. But it says he's going to be standing up and keeping watch during this troubling time. Well, Israel, among all people on the earth, Israel has probably gone, the Jewish people, the most troubling times of any other people group. Incredibly mistreated throughout history, from even before Daniel's time and what we read about last week with Antiochus Epiphanes, into Roman occupation of Israel in 70 AD when the city was destroyed and up to 1 million Jews were killed. And you go through to the Dark Ages, the Crusades, coming to convert them all to Christianity or be put to death, and all the way into less than 100 years ago when millions of Jews were put into gas chambers and killed by Nazi Germany. But even though Israel's had many troubling times, this time in the tribulation is going to be an incredibly difficult time on earth, and especially troubling for the nation of Israel. Jesus referenced this verse in Matthew 24 again. In verse 21 he said, "There will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever shall be." Jesus says there's coming a day of tribulation like the world has never experienced before. That is on the horizon. I believe it's close, but it says that at that time, when the things are the worst they've ever been, Michael shall stand up. Verse 1 continues, "And at that time your people, Daniel's people, the Jews, shall be delivered, everyone who is found written in the book." I encourage you to read Revelation 12 and Daniel chapter 12 side by side, because Revelation 12 is almost a commentary on what we read here in Daniel chapter 12. It says this in Revelation 12, "War broke out in heaven. Michael," the same Michael we read here, the archangel, the keeper of watch over the nation of Israel, "and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was place found for them in heaven any longer." So Michael's going to stand, Michael's going to fight, he's going to kick Satan out of heaven. It says here, a remnant of Daniel's people, those whose names are written in the book of life, will be delivered after the Antichrist is defeated. Verse 2 of chapter 12, "Many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt." And I'm going to spend a little bit of time here on this. This is important. The resurrection that awaits us all is found in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. You know, the oldest book of the Bible is not Genesis. It records the earliest events, but it wasn't the oldest book of the Bible. The oldest book, the first book written, is the book of Job. And Job said in chapter 19, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold." Even after, he's talking about after my skin is destroyed and I'm dead. "My eyes shall behold, and not another. Oh, my heart yearns within me." In the midst of all of Job's suffering and difficulty, he believed that he would stand before God one day and that there was life after death. Abraham believed that to be true. David believed that to be true. And Daniel here speaks of the resurrection that awaits all of us as well. Some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. There is no third category. Those are the two categories. And all are in either one of these sums. Now, if you turn to Revelation 20, I want you to see this for yourself. The Bible speaks of two categories of resurrection. At the end of the tribulation period, this yet coming 7-year period where God pours out his righteous wrath on a Christ-rejecting, sinful world. At the end of that period, those who were killed in the tribulation, those who began to follow God during the tribulation and made a decision for him then. They didn't make a decision before the tribulation started, but they made a decision for him in the midst of the 7-year tribulation. They're going to become martyrs during the tribulation period, and they're going to be resurrected. They're part of category 1, okay? Then category 2 is after the 1,000-year reign. So there's the 7-year tribulation. Jesus comes back, sets up his millennial kingdom on planet Earth, rules and reigns 1,000 years of peace and prosperity on planet Earth. And then after that 1,000-year millennial reign, the second category of resurrection takes place, where the unrighteous are then resurrected and judged. And so I want you to see this in part for yourself here in Revelation 20, beginning in verse 4. John says, I saw thrones, and they sat on them, and judgment was committed to them. Then I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their witness to Jesus and for the word of God, who had not worshipped the beast or his image. This is during those who died during the tribulation period, and had not received his mark on their foreheads or on their hands. And they lived and reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. But the rest of the dead did not live again until the 1,000 years were finished. This is the first resurrection. Now skip down to verse 11 of Revelation 20. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat on it, from whose face the earth and heaven fled away, and there was found no place for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before God, and the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged according to their works, by the things which were written in the books. It's all recorded. The sea, verse 13, gave up the dead who were in it, and death and Hades delivered up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one according to his works. Then death and Hades were cast into the lake of fire. This is the second death, and anyone not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. There's these two categories of resurrection that we are going to be part of, one or the other, because we are eternal beings. And if you're here this morning, you just drifted in here, you're not even sure how you found your way in here this morning, that's what you need to understand, is you are going to live forever. You are eternal. Jesus said this in John 5, 28 and 29. He says, do not marvel at this, for the hour is coming which all who are in the graves will hear his voice and come forth. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life. And the way we do good is to be found in him. And those who have done evil to the resurrection of condemnation. Jesus as well does not have three categories. It's not your resurrection to everlasting life, or you're resurrected to condemnation, or you could just, take a dirt nap forever. That's not the way it is. There isn't three categories. And Jesus, when he came in John chapter 11 to Lazarus' tomb, he was met by Lazarus' sister named Mary and Martha. And he said to Martha, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And he who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me, he shall never die. Do you believe this? He said to Martha. Now, as fascinating as all, maybe some of you are saying, well, this isn't fascinating at all. But people can get really caught up in studying the Antichrist, the Antichrist, the Antichrist. Who is he? All these characteristics that you listed off, the big plan, the big mouth, all of this. Who does that fit? Is that Donald Trump? Is it this? Is it that? And we speculate and speculate. The important thing for us to know this morning is what we do with Jesus Christ, not the Antichrist. And it's revealed to Daniel here and recorded for us that there's two categories of resurrection. There's not three, there's not one. And one is for those who have trusted Christ. They are going to everlasting life. The second, that is eternal condemnation and separation from God. Now, Verse 3, during this tribulation time, it's going to be dark, 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 hard. Things that we can't imagine. It's going to make the Jews in Nazi Germany not look as bad as what this is going to take place. But, verse 3 says, those who are wise shall shine in the midst of all that darkness. Those who are wise, those who follow the Lord's way, his precepts, his commands, his laws, they shall shine like the brightness of the firmament. And those who turn, I love this, those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. It's, we're in graduation season and everybody's thinking about futures and what's going to happen. You want a bright future? Daniel is told how right here. Turn many people toward righteousness, and you're guaranteed a bright future. No matter what path your career may take, this is a bright future. You'll shine like stars forever and ever. Now, this brings an end to the prophecy. Verse 4, and Daniel's told, but you, Daniel, shut up the words. Let me rephrase that. I got to put the weight on the right words. I'm not like, Daniel, shut up. Let me rephrase that. But you, Daniel, shut up the words, and I did it again. Okay, let's just read it. And seal the book until the time of the end. Okay, first of all, he did not tell Daniel to shut up, okay? Secondly, he told him to shut up the words. Keep these words safe and sealed until they're needed, until the time of the end. And then he says, this is when many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. So after Daniel receives this prophecy through chapter 11 and into chapter 12, we get like a little bonus prophecy here. And it says that men will go to and fro and knowledge will increase. And the idea is that in the last days, many are going to be looking at their news feed, looking at the newspaper and thinking, what is going on in the world? What in the heck? And many are going to seek out the words of this book to try to figure out what's going on. But it also points to dramatic changes in transportation and information. Time will come when many, it says, shall run to and fro. He's not talking about a Babylonian fun run here. He's referring to the speed and the ease of travel that is going to take place. Many of you are familiar, I hope, with Isaac Newton, pretty famous scientist dude. Well, he loved Jesus and was a student of the Word of God. And based on this verse, he speculated all the way back in 1733. He speculated that there would be incredible changes to how people travel and that future people will be able to travel so quickly, perhaps even up to 50 miles an hour. That's pretty smart back in 1733 with really, what do you have to work with? But from this verse, he could see that coming. And I'll add, he believed the end to come sometime between the year 2000 and 2050. With the time of the end will be when people shall run to and fro. I was just talking to someone this past week, and we're talking about how from Genesis till George Washington, the quickest way to get from point A to point B was horseback. For thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years, that was the quickest way to go from here and there. And in 2 months, there's 24 folks from our church that are going to travel 9,000 miles to Uganda in a little over 20 hours. And that's because we have 2 layovers. It's just this, we go to and fro, okay? Can we say that this is the time of the end? We go to and fro pretty fast here. Now, I also read yesterday that 90,000 flights every day in the U.S. alone. 90,000. How did I read that? I Googled it. The next thing he's told right here is that there's going to be an increase in information. Now, the word information in the Hebrew is Google. I'm joking. It's not Google. But yesterday I was watching the baseball game with my buddy who likes to ask some questions to me, and questions I don't know the answer of. And we're watching the Sox play the Mariners, and he's like, how old is Stephen Wright, the pitcher for the White Sox? And I'm like, I don't know. Google, how old is Stephen Wright? He's 32. He's 32. Is J.D. Martinez, all he does is bat? Doesn't play, he's just a designated hitter? How much money does he make? How big was J.D. Martinez's contract? $110 million over 5 years. Now, that should blow us away in and of itself, but the information, all of this information in a second, right there, if your Wi-Fi is good. It's right there. I read this a couple months ago, that if you sat down and began to watch everything that was uploaded onto YouTube in one day, say you sat down today and I'm going to watch everything that was uploaded to YouTube on yesterday, it would take you 7 years to watch it all. 7 years, that's a lot of information. So Daniel, the end is going to take place when the times get like 2018. When there's major changes to transportation and information. Seal it up to then, and then it's going to become something that people need to pay attention to. They really need to understand and get down. Verse 5, then I, Daniel, looked, and there stood 2 others, one on this riverbank and the other on that riverbank. If you remember, all of this took place on the bank of the river Tigris. And one said to the man clothed in linen who was above the waters, above the river, how long shall the fulfillment of these wonders be? Verse 7. Then I heard the man clothed in linen who was above the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand to heaven, and swore by him who lives forever, that it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. And when the power of the holy people has been completely shattered, all these things shall be finished. Finished. Sorry, I pushed the button there. That was all me. It's usually you. Okay, maybe. We've seen this before, this time, times, and half a time. A time is 1 year, times is 2, and half a time would be half a year. So 3.5 years. It's all going to finish after these last 3.5 years of the tribulation. 3.5 years after the Antichrist breaks his peace treaty with the nation of Israel and things get hard, the people are shattered. 3.5 years after the abomination of desolation is put up in the holy place. And that's when the time of the end shall be. Then all these things shall be finished. When the people are just feeling crushed and shattered, that's when Messiah is going to show up and rescue them. Then, maybe Daniel speaks for you this morning. Verse 8. Although I heard, I did not understand. Maybe you're sitting here this morning like, I've heard a lot of words out of you, a lot of information, and I just want to go to and fro right now. It's too much. I don't understand it. But I love this. It's okay that you to be honest with the Lord. Daniel says, I don't get it. Then I said, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he said, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. So I'm sure that what Daniel's writing had some value to contemporary people that lived in that day. He said, but there's coming a day, the time of the end, when this prophecy is going to even have more value. So just go your way, seal it up till the time of the end. Verse 10, many shall be purified, made white, and refined. That's something that can only happen by way of the cross. But the wicked shall do wickedly. And there's going to be people that are getting saved through the blood of Jesus. And there are going to be people that keep on going, sinning, worse and worse. It is going to keep going in both directions. And none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And, verse 11, from the time that the daily sacrifices is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. Okay. This is a little tricky. Hang with me. We're almost done. This is my Father's Day gift to you. It's a long message. If you've been with us through Daniel, through Revelation, we have heard a lot about the time, times, and half a time. We've heard it called 3.5 years. We've heard it called 42 months. We've heard it called 1,260 days. But here the Lord says 1,290 days. 1,290 days from the abomination of desolation till the consummation of all things. And blessed is he who waits 1,335 days. Now, this is what I imagine Daniel. He's received this just total information download over the last 12 chapters. And I can't help but he's thinking, Lord, it's been 1,260 days this whole time. You can't just add another 30 days and then say, seal up the book, Daniel, without telling me what that's about. Inquiring minds want to know. But like I said, this is tricky, but I would tell you what most scholars believe what is being said here is that Jesus will return. And we know this, again, over and over again from Revelation and Daniel, that Jesus is going to return for his second coming, not the rapture, but the second coming after 3.5 years, after this middle point of the tribulation period, 42 months, 1,260 days after that, Jesus is going to return. He is then going to set up his millennial kingdom over the next 30 days. And you're like, well, what's the deal with that? And if you can just imagine, we don't want to imagine it, but if you could imagine, maybe you could think of 9/11 or something, but the things that are going to go on planet Earth during the tribulation are global and devastating, and things are going to take some time to be put back together. And so many believe that this 30-day period is Jesus setting up his kingdom after this desolation that's taken place on planet Earth. And then over the next 45 days, he's going to judge the nations. He's going to separate the sheep and the goats, described in Matthew 25. And that's going to take us to 1,335 days. So return after 1,260 days after the abomination of desolation. Set up his millennial kingdom and begin to rule and reign for 1,000 years. 30 days after that, and then another 75 days or 2.5 months, or 45 days, he's going to separate the sheep and the goats. But whatever's taking place during these mystery days that we're told about here, there's blessing, he says, for those who make it. I'm sure Daniel had more questions to ask, but notice verse 13. But you, Daniel, you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of days. This is my last application for us as we finish the book. This is a good word for all of us. Go, he's towards four things here. Go, rest, arise, and receive. Number one, go your way. Don't get distracted by this. I know it's interesting. I know it's fascinating, Daniel. I know you have more questions about prophecy, but live the life I've called you to. Stay the course. Go your way. You've been faithful. You've been in a lion's den. You've been surrounded by wickedness and difficult things. You're 90 years old. Go your way. Keep standing strong and live the life that I have for you until God calls you home. Second, rest. You're going to die, Daniel. It's going to happen. And that's a reality again. One, that I talked about earlier, is you have to understand you're an eternal being. Two, physically, your body's going to die. And we have to navigate those things here. And he's telling Daniel, you're going to die, but don't worry about it. Remember when you were a kid and your parents would say, it's time for you to take a nap. Like, oh, you'd fight, argue, I don't want to, that punishment, oh. And then you get this magical age of like upper 20s, lower 30s maybe, and you're like, that's not a punishment, that's a reward. I want to take a nap today. That would be very nice. And that's what he's telling Daniel. And go your way. You don't have to fear death any more than you fear death. You're going to fall asleep in this life, and you're going to wake up with the Lord, because the next thing is you will rise. You will arise. There's a promise of resurrection awaiting you. You're going to be resurrected to everlasting life, Daniel. And number 4, you will receive your inheritance. Follow me, Daniel. Trust in me. Everything is going to go exactly as planned, and you will hear, well done, my good and faithful servant. And Daniel went his way. And I love that these are the last recorded words. I don't know how much longer he lived after that. It could have been a day. It could have been another 10, 20 years. Who knows? But Daniel went his way from this and finished his life. The last thing he took in was the promise of the resurrection and that security. And I don't want anyone to leave this room without that same security. I saw a bumper sticker this past week. I was driving to Charity. I don't know if she saw it or not, but it said, it's on the bumper of this pickup truck, and it said, heaven doesn't want me, and hell's afraid I'll take over. Both of those statements are not true. And Jesus, because hell is extremely welcoming, and heaven is dying to have you. And Jesus died so that we wouldn't have to face judgment. He invites us. He's inviting you. If you've never accepted it, now's another opportunity. But only your heart be calloused. And he invites you to enjoy and partake of the resurrection to everlasting life. I read this before from John 11, but Jesus again, he told Mary, I'm the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me, he shall never die. And then he asked Mary, pointedly, he said that here's the truth about death and life and resurrection and eternity. He said to her, do you believe this? This is a question for all of us. If we place our trust in Jesus, we can be victorious over death. He who has the Son has life. Death is swallowed up by his victory. And when I'm him, I become the victor. I don't have to worry about that anymore. I can be part of the resurrection to eternal life. And he says, do you believe this? This is something that's personal. Your eternal destiny depends upon the answer to this question. Do you believe this? If you do, if you decide today, you can hear like Daniel, go, rest, arise, and receive your inheritance. But you can only hear those words and apply them to your own life if you've accepted this. Do you believe this, that he who lives and believes in me shall never die? And so I want to encourage you this morning, if you've never made a commitment to follow God and trust your life with him, to not just acknowledge that he exists and believe that going to church is a nice thing to do, but really say, I want to follow you, Lord. I want to step into your life, because in your life, death is swallowed up by your victory over death itself. When you resurrected that day, you conquered death, and I want to be part of that. Let today be that day. Don't wait one more moment. If you're a father here, there's not a better decision that you can make for your kids than to say, I'm going to live for Jesus now. Instead of living for self, the enemy's been tempting me and trying to get me to do this my whole life. Do it your way, whatever pleases you. But I don't want to do that anymore. That's the best decision that you can make for your kids. If you're a child, most of us have been a child at one time or another. It's still the best decision you can make because we have a good Father who gave his only begotten Son so that we could live and have eternal life. Let today be the day of salvation. And if you have made that decision, rejoice in that fact that we do have an inheritance awaiting us. Let's pray.